I'm glad you're doing it now, not waiting. On Facebook? Oh yeah, I see me. Why the virus is winning live now. I'm gonna click watch video. You want me to share? Oh, share what? The link? Like here, like that? That's what you want me to do? Oh, you want me to share it on my own Facebook page? Hold on, I got to turn off the sound on Facebook, or we're gonna get in a loop. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. No, 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 no. I'm good. You just want me to share it to my personal page? No problem. I can do that. You do what you need to do. Wait a minute. I'm in that. I got to turn off the sound whenever I do that. All right. Let me try to share it. If you're watching now, we begin live in about a little under 15 minutes. Hi, Shannon. Hey, Michael. Feel free to share the video. We're trying a new way to have my guests show up, but I'm still working out the details here. Show starts in 10 minutes. We're starting in about 10 minutes, folks. Tell all your friends. Feel free to share the show. Still can't do call-ins yet till next week, but we do have a live guest, which is cool. And a live guest for the video. Hey, my video quality is as good as CNN's right now. All right, go right ahead. We got a few people watching on Facebook, which is fine. Well, I'm just watching the Facebook. I'm not even watching the Skype. Because it's. You're right. Because the time. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. All right. Well, I'm not going to close it because I still want to read comments in the break, but I will not have it as my main screen. Right, let me get my clock up here. All right. Fantastic. Okay.
Hey, Mark. And Mark, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Sure. Hope I can be helpful.
I'm sure you can. I got lots of questions. We may run over, but we'll see. I have a full hour, so go ahead, Mark.
I have a hard stop. I'm supposed to hard stop at 3:30, but I could go a few minutes over without getting into trouble. But much beyond that will be a problem. I've got another meeting at 3:30.
Fair enough.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I'll see. Just on.
So
Yeah,
this is radio. You just need you don't need the video then, do you?
Well, actually, we do because we're showing it on Facebook and
Okay.
YouTube, and so you have a nice background. You'll do fine.
No problem. Thanks.
For those that are watching on Facebook or YouTube, they'll actually see us side by side, which will be
Gotcha.
nice.
Okay.
Setting that up now. Dr. Bollinger, how long have you been involved in public health?
Let's see. I'm also a clinician. I take care of patients too. I've been doing this for I've been in Hopkins for more than 30 years. And I've been working a lot overseas. I do most of my work, my research and education overseas in India and elsewhere.
Did you look at things like Ebola and the swine flu and other examples?
Not directly with Ebola, but I've had some experience with influenza in India and certainly here in the United States in patients. We were involved a little bit in some Ebola tracking, about 5 or 6 years ago for people coming back from Liberia who were exposed.
And when you say we, do you mean Johns Hopkins?
Johns Hopkins. Yeah. Johns Hopkins.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm getting at your. You have a long resume.
Just Bob Bollinger, professor of infectious diseases.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. I won't read the entire thing. It's too much. You're too competent for my time frame. But all right. So radio, I don't know if you know this, Doctor. We begin at 6 minutes after the hour. That's an old radio tradition to allow 6 minutes of news and commercials and stuff. So we technically begin 3:06 sharp. So we have about 6.5 minutes to go. Just so you know, we are being broadcast live right now on Facebook. People can hear our conversation, but we're not on the radio yet.
All right.
And the amount of listeners on Facebook is tiny compared to the amount of listeners on radio. But you are being heard. So.
Where are you located, Mark, currently?
I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, which is just across the river from Washington, D.C.
Yep. Up
You
the
probably
river.
know that. Johns Hopkins, yeah. You outside of this area, people don't know where Alexandria is, but Baltimoreans certainly know where Alexandria is.
Yeah.
I used to do this show from D.C.
Uh-huh.
And then COVID hit. So I do it from home. And give.
Oh, good. Yeah, I do. Dr. Burks as well. I've known them for a long time from their HIV.
Okay. Well, then I'll raise. What did you work with them? Like, this is all again heard on Facebook, but won't be on the air, but on the radio. But what did you work with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Burks on?
Well, I've been working in HIV for a long time, and a lot of my work overseas has been HIV. And Dr. Fauci is one of the leads, and Dr. Burks has got a long career in HIV as well. So I know them both through their early days in HIV.
So much to talk about. the career you've chosen is. Well, I was going to say it's a tough one. There's a lot of sadness, but I guess there's a lot of happiness when you finally get a vaccine or a cure or something.
And there's always a new challenge, right?
Yep.
Mhm. Well, we certainly, out of necessity, have to accelerate it, don't we? Well, I guess you have to believe in science for that to be true, right? So
That's true. That's part of our problem. Just so you know, because I'm not hiding the ball or anything. My very first question is going to be basically, what are other countries doing right that we're doing wrong? That's
Sure.
where the conversation will begin, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
So we start in 2.5 minutes. Yep.
My pleasure.
Very much appreciate it.
Sure. Absolutely, man. Yeah, I think that's one of them. Yeah. Well, I think the entire lineup hit home runs off the Orioles.
Oh,
Uh,
all right, 1.5 minutes, folks. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, feel free to share the link so folks can watch it live from the beginning. We begin in a little over 1 minute. That's fine. All good. Sure. "20 seconds, folks."
Live from our nation's capital, it's the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Good afternoon, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I am your host, Mark Levine, reporting live, a safe social distance from Washington, D.C. We are in trouble in America. We have 135,000 Americans dead from the COVID virus. We have infections growing at an increasing rate. All that social distancing, all that quarantining doesn't seem to be working for us, although it does seem to be working in other countries around the globe. Today, we're going to explore why, what we're doing wrong that other countries are doing right. And with that, I've got an expert from Johns Hopkins University, one of the premier medical universities in the country. His name is Dr. Bob Bollinger. He's the Raj and Kamla Gupta Professor of Infectious Diseases at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He holds joint appointments in international health and public health, community public health. He's the founding director of Global Health. And he also has been working with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. So really very pleased to have you and your expertise on the show, Dr. Bollinger.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
So let's start with the basic question. This virus began in China and South Korea before it peaked here. I remember back in March, some folks, I don't know if mocking is the right word, but let's say looking down our noses a bit at Italy, Spain, Great Britain, other countries were not doing the right thing. But all of them are doing better now, and we're not. Please tell me why.
Well, it's a really important question for all of us to ask ourselves here in the United States, Mark. As you said, back in March and April, when things were peaking, probably a couple of weeks ahead of us in Europe, we were looking like we were about 2 weeks behind them and heading in the same direction. And of course, since that time, there's been a dramatic decline in new cases in Europe. And we had an initial decline once we started getting some control over things in the Northeast. And now, of course, it's just rocketed out of control since then. So just to put it in perspective, I think we're over 60,000 cases a day now in the United States, and I think there are less than 6,000 cases a day in the entire European Union. And this is
10 times.
Yeah,
we're about the same population as Europe. We have 10 times.
Well, what do we have? We've got 350 million. They have 450 million. We have 50 states. They have 27 countries. They've got diverse populations, diverse leaders, borders, challenges, just like we do. And we certainly saw that if people were paying attention to what was happening in Italy and Spain early on. They were challenged with overrun hospitals and shortage of PPE, but they figured out how to slow things down dramatically compared to where we are today. And I think the major difference is that the population and the community there and the leaders are listening to the scientists, and they're following the instructions. It's not really rocket science why it's different.
So is it wearing a mask? Is it social distancing? What are we doing wrong?
Physical distancing, wearing a mask, and avoiding close contact with others. It's a virus. It spreads from person to person. If you're around close to other people and you're not wearing a mask and they're not wearing a mask, the virus spreads very efficiently. And so when you open up bars and restaurants, when you open up churches, when you open up inside venues, and people aren't wearing masks and they're not physically distancing, the virus spreads really, really fast. And that's certainly what's happened. And I think you see that the places where people are following these simple instructions at a much, the higher percentage of the population is following those instructions, the lower the rates.
So a number of states are talking about opening schools in the fall. The Trump administration has basically said you must open schools. Being a nation of 50 states, as you point out, we have dramatically different approaches from coast to coast. What is the fear of opening schools? And is there some truth that there are studies that suggest that we all know the studies that show that older people are more likely to be harmed by the disease, but there are at least some studies, even in such reputable sources as the New York Times, that suggest that small children, prepubescent children, elementary school age children, may not transmit it as much as teenagers and adults do. Is there some room here for schools? What do you think?
Well, I think there's two issues that you brought up there. One is that it's not one size fits all because the rates are different in different parts of the country, different counties, different cities. And so if you're in a situation where the rates are just skyrocketing in your community, the risk is going to be much higher to open up schools and businesses and other venues. If the rates are low, it's you're reducing the probability. I think the transmission certainly kids can get infected even when they're young, and they can transmit it. Whether they transmit at a lower rate or not is not entirely clear. But there are some studies suggesting that. If you look in some countries in Europe, that's one of the things that many of them did. They started opening up the schools first with the youngest kids for exactly that reason. But remember, look, the biggest issue is not just the kids themselves. It's the kids taking the virus home to their parents and their grandparents. It's the kids who may be feeling fine infecting teachers. I mean, what is it? I think 25%, 30% of the teachers in the United States are considered high risk, either because of their age or comorbidity. It's not going to be easy for teachers in many of these communities, particularly where it's really raging, for them to feel safe going back in the classroom. And so we've got to do things to reduce that risk, regardless of whether the kids transmit at a low rate or not. If there's enough of those kids coming in the door, some of them are going to transmit to the teachers and take it home.
So some European countries are opening schools. I assume that's because their virus rate is way down. And I guess my question is, they peaked before we did. I mean, Italy, I remember when Italy was a terrible crisis, and we had only had at least reported a few hundred cases. They must have I won't say eradicated because that's too strong, but they clearly have a much lesser rate of virus in their population now than Americans do today. What did Italy do that we didn't do to get their rate lower?
They shut down, and they stayed shut down. By that I mean they shut down earlier than we did, and more comprehensively. So and more consistently. I mean, look, we saw this same pattern 100 years ago with Spanish flu. The places that reduce exposure of people to each other, where people wear masks, where they close the bars and restaurants and the schools, and they keep them closed longer, there's lower infection. That happened with Spanish flu, and it's happening with coronavirus.
So recently, actually, I think it was just yesterday in Utah, they were looking at opening the schools, and a whole bunch of people who were opposed to masks came in, ignored the social distancing, sat right next to each other without masks. So much so that the Utah commissioner, happened to all be Republicans, as it happens, shut down the hearing a minute later and said, "Look, this itself is a danger to public health." But there is a certain group of Americans, and I think they are the minority of Americans, but who see the right not to wear a mask as almost a constitutional right. That that's my freedom. And one of the things that I find interesting is that the mask, while it does protect both parties, actually protects the person on the other side of the mask more than the person wearing the mask. So when you wear a mask, you're protecting yourself somewhat, but you're even more protecting someone else if you have the virus. So it's sort of it's a social thing where your mask protects me and my mask protects you. How do you address the people who just simply feel it's their personal freedom right not to wear one?
Well, I would imagine those are the same people who feel it's their perfect freedom to drink and drive. Because it's the same idea, right? We don't think it's a good idea for people to drive when they're drunk, because they may hurt themselves, but they're just probably even more likely to hurt others. And so we assume, a lot of us, most people feel like that's something we need to do in society, protect us, the community. But for some reason, people feel like they should have the right to put others at risk, whether not wearing a mask if they're COVID infected, or I suppose they have the same rationale for why they want to drive drunk.
So what do you tell folks like the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who recently issued a statewide order forbidding, making illegal local options, like in Savannah and Atlanta, where they were requiring mask wearing? I mean, what's a person in Georgia to do if they have a governor that doesn't seem to really care much about their public safety?
Well, they can ignore the governor and wear a mask. I mean, they're not prohibiting. He's not saying they shouldn't wear a mask or they can't wear a mask. But I think people could take responsibility for themselves and for their communities and wear a mask, despite what the governor says.
So, Dr. Bollinger, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about your work with Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Birx, and also the prospect, perhaps, of a vaccine that we've seen some promising first trials. If so, how soon could that come about? How soon could it actually be effective to protect us all? So, again, thank you for coming on the show. We will take a quick break, and we'll be back in 4 minutes.
If you're worried your friend may be struggling, remember, you don't have to be there to be there.
All right,
You
thanks.
can say how
Yeah.
are you or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You could write them a text or knit them a sweater. If you can't be together,
I
you
may
can
do that.
write 'em-
Actually, Doctor, other than talking about Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and a vaccine, is there any particular area of this you want to make sure I address in your next segment, which is before you go? Just anything you want to make sure I cover?
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about whatever else is on your mind. I think there was some mention about this change in the CDC data reporting and what impact that might have. I don't know if that was
let's
something you
make
want to
sure
talk about.
That's actually, I absolutely do want to talk about that. Thank you. It's actually on my list, and I should have read it here. So, thank you. Oh, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. Fair enough. So yeah, we are going live stream while we're in commercial break. So let me just ask you something. It's sort of a side issue. I'll get to the main issue in a minute. But people are talking about the fact that there may be long-term health problems from COVID.
Right.
That even after you recover, it may still affect you. Can you describe a little bit what those might be? I know we don't really know because we haven't had it
Right.
long-term.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mark. We don't know, as you've pointed out, because we haven't followed people long enough. But what we're seeing are, and expecting are consequences of this infection could last longer. For example, anybody that's been on a ventilator for a long time, and even if they survive, is at risk for long-term lung problems. And certainly that's something we should be expecting. Whenever you have a bad pneumonia of any kind, it could lead to long-term damage to the lung potentially. So, or even for kids that might have a relatively mild infection, if they get a pneumonia, the worry might be that they might have a higher risk for asthma or other things later on. We're seeing problems with, cognition. People who have trouble neurologically after
So
this.
how does that work? I mean, it damages the lungs. Is that because not enough oxygen is getting to the brain? How does it affect
That's
cognition?
certainly one of the things we're wondering about, but also this virus in some people really revs up the immune system. And so having all this activity in the body can create, toxins, perhaps is one way to think about it, in the body that could damage other organs, including the brain, the kidney, the heart. And so, in some people that could also be an issue.
You said you worked on AIDS, which was also a messed up human immunodeficiency virus. It seems that the most dangerous viruses are the ones that get our human body to attack ourselves, with the supposed helper cells going wrong. It's kind of like, I don't want to get too off topic, but police reform, when the people who are supposed to protect you aren't protecting you, that's somehow the most danger. So my question for you is, in addition to an ordinary, we'll get to this when we get back to the radio, but in addition to an ordinary vaccine where you build up antibodies sort of the traditional way with smallpox and other things we've used, is there a way to sort of dampen down the power of our own immunity system? I mean, it seems almost counterproductive because you're stopping the other things that fight disease.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges perhaps with the vaccine development, but I think we're actually using that concept in treating people with severe COVID. I mean, you may have read about the latest studies talked about using a drug called dexamethasone.
Okay.
Dexamethasone is a steroid, and in people with really severe disease, it has been shown recently that it reduces the risk of death in people that are on
respirator. I'm going to stop you right
respirator.
now because we're about to go back on the radio and join our radio listeners in. Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest is Dr. Bob Bollinger. He's a professor of infectious diseases at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He's been involved in public health issues for more than 30 years, has worked with Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Birx, and he's certainly working as best he can on the COVID crisis. Doctor, do you have actually patients that you treat that have COVID, or are you mostly working on the public health aspects?
I was taking care of patients last month for 2 weeks at Hopkins. So yeah, I still do clinical work there as well.
And you wear the full outfit with the N95 mask.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is it just to get the human side of this? Because we can talk about the clinician stuff, and we'll get back there. But someone dying and their family can't be around them. I mean, death is a pretty horrible thing. It's kind of hard to imagine it worse, but if there is a worse way to die, it's when you die and your family can't hold your hand and be in the room with you, right? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's really awful, Mark, and it's tough not just on the patients and their families. It's tough on all of us, the providers, the nurses in particular, who, are basically there, helping people say their last goodbyes over a video call, right? I mean, instead of what we're used to. We're used to helping families deal with tragedy and death. It's never easy, but it's particularly difficult and challenging now.
So the Trump administration has changed the way data has been reported. First, Donald Trump said we need to stop testing people because then we learn how many people have the disease. Now they're not even showing the results of the tests. They're taking them from the CDC and sending them directly to the White House. They're not available to the CDC now. Kind of reminds me of the ostrich strategy of dealing with the lion. The lion approaches the ostrich sticks his head in the sand, can't see the lion, so I'm sure all is well for that ostrich. Is that the purpose of this? Literally just to hide the truth from the American people?
Well, I'm not sure what the purpose is. Certainly it's true that we need more accurate and complete and up-to-date data about COVID. I mean, and that's important for making sure that we have the right prevention strategies. We can improve taking care of patients. It really helps us allocate resources more effectively. We have good data. Where do we send the test kits? Where do we put the PPE? Who needs ventilators? All that stuff. It helps us make better decisions about when it's safer to open schools, for example, when we really have good data. So we need good data. And the current system in the United States that's the people have talked about that tracks COVID data that went through the CDC really has not been adequate. I mean, I think we've seen examples of why it hasn't been adequate. So we need better centralized data for reporting it. Most European countries do better than we do because they have universal health care and they have centralized national systems for collecting data. In the United States, healthcare is very decentralized. It's non-coordinated. We've got public sector and private sector, and this system won't talk to that system. So it's very difficult, even if CDC was doing its job very well, had a great system, to get all that data from our complex healthcare system into a centralized place. So we need some strategies to improve that. And certainly this COVID problem has really revealed and highlighted all these challenges, right, that we have in providing accurate and timely data. I think the problem I have is if these data are reported to a centralized system and that's not available to the public and to stakeholders, that's a big problem. Because the whole purpose of having the data is so we can make better decisions, right? And so we can respond more effectively. And if we don't have access to the data, that defeats the purpose. The data needs to be more reliable and accurate. So maybe, systems that improve the accuracy of the data would be good. But finally, I think, we have to use the data, right? I mean, one of the challenges, we've had data at the CDC for all of its challenges and limitations hasn't been used by the federal government.
Well, I was going to get to that because European countries are doing contact tracing, right? Where if someone has a disease, they talk to their friends, they talk to their colleagues. How's contact tracing going in America?
Well,
why isn't the CDC using it to do that?
Well, it's really not the CDC's job to do the contact tracing. It's the job of the local health departments. So it's the local state health departments that are really responsible in the communities for doing the contact tracing in their own communities. And those communities are doing that. And they're using their own local data to drive that process. And that's true in Europe as well. There may be national strategies, but the boots on the ground is happening on the local level.
Is Europe doing a better job at contact tracing, or is it just the fact that the Europeans stayed home for a month and or two, and we just didn't, or at least in areas of the country we didn't in Texas and Florida? maybe we did here in Virginia and in Maryland. Is that the
Yeah,
heart of it?
I mean, contact tracing is only part of the whole menu of things we have to do. And contact tracing is more effective and easier to implement when the house isn't on fire. I mean, contact tracing is like a smoke detector approach. We're looking for smoke, go investigate the smoke, put the fire, when the whole neighborhood's on fire, you're too busy trying to put the fire out.
So, trying to end this conversation on a lighter note or a happier note, there were some promising first stage trials for Moderna in developing a vaccine. Realistically, though, when can we expect a vaccine to be ready and available to the average American, not just people participating in studies? Are we talking November, December, next July? It seems like it's something in that range between the end of this year and the middle of next year.
Well, I hope so. And if we do, it's a world record. I mean, the
Really?
world record for vaccine development is 4 years for mumps, right? So if we're able to pull this off, it'll be a world record. And the difference now, of course, is that we're putting a lot more effort scientifically. The scientists around the world, despite how, public approaches may change and government approaches may change, the scientists are really galvanizing around this and collaborating on this in some really unique ways. I mean, we can't vaccinate millions of people or billions of people until we know the vaccine's safe, that it works, that it can be manufactured and can be delivered, that you even have the syringes that you need and the people to give the vaccines. And so you've got to use these vaccine trials to make sure they're safe and effective. And there's just a process. We can't put out a vaccine until we know it's safe to millions of people.
Well,
and that's
of course, mumps didn't kill that many people, but Ebola, swine flu, we have had pandemics before that we were quite nervous were going to kill a lot of people. How long did it take for a vaccine for those? And will we do better than those two examples?
Well, it's been years for the Ebola vaccine as well, right? So, if we pull this off in 12 to 18 months, which is the current target, it would be incredible. And, I'm optimistic in some ways, but I'm also cautious because, we could hit a grand slam, as Dr. Fauci likes to say, you take a lot of shots on goal, you hope one of them go in. We could hit a grand slam and have this go perfectly and have data by the end of this year. Maybe get some manufacturing up and begin to start vaccinating, in the early part of next year. That would be fantastic. But we don't know that we're going to hit the grand slam. We could have some hiccups along the way, some challenges with the vaccine not working or maybe not being safe in certain populations. So we've got a long way to go before we could be that confident.
So just a few seconds left, the earliest you would expect a vaccine would be when I say vaccine, I mean available to the American public, January, February of next year, and the latest could be years away?
Could be years away. But on the upside, one of the things is we're taking some risk. The companies and society's taking risks because we're starting to build factories to make these vaccines before we even know they work. So that the minute we find, that one of these pucks goes in the goal, we know hopefully that manufacturing company is already making a vaccine.
Hopefully so. And with that, I'm up against a hard break. Dr. Bollinger, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey,
All right,
Dad,
good to see
how
you.
do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come
Absolutely.
from?
Really, really appreciate
Is
you
this
coming
tree
and
good
delivering
for
your
climbing?
expertise. Thanks so much.
What happens if I
Take
mix
care.
these two
Bye-bye.
things
All right.
together? How are
Folks, we
babies
still
made?
have a half hour to go. We're
What does
going
this
to
thing
talk
do?
about COVID a little bit more and the political impacts of it all, how it affects both our government and, the future of our nation. Kind of draw the lens out a little bit from the virus itself to its economically, politically, all of that. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in another 3 minutes. Go get yourself a drink and come back at 3:34 Eastern Time. If you want to make comments, I'm going to look at your comments now. And I'm happy to address them. I only had Dr. Bollinger for the first half hour, so And next week, we hope to finally bring back in phone calls. I've missed them. And we've been working on getting that done. It's harder to do here remotely, but I think we figured it out. So you'll want to stay tuned in next week so you can talk back to me finally. Mark Grimaldi, one of my. Oh wait, someone just deleted their comment. Okay. I won't address it then. All right, back in 2 minutes. Yeah. Right, it's all political now. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that, and I'm gonna talk about Kemp, and that's just crazy.
San Francisco general strike had begun. Over 150,000 workers, including Teamsters
Diana,
and butchers, restaurant and transit workers, joined longshoremen and seafarers in shutting down the ports, the city, and the highways. But as Brecker points out, the strike was met with a powerful counterattack. Hundreds of special deputies were sworn in. The National Guard was called out, complete with infantry, machine guns, tanks, and artillery units. State officials were poised on the edge of declaring martial law. Vigilante raids began on the 17th with assaults on the Marine Workers Industrial Union and the offices of the Western Worker newspaper and strike bulletin. Many other gathering places and homes where workers regularly met were also busted up. Hundreds were rounded up, beaten, and arrested. The city's Central Labor Committee authorized exceptions that eroded the strike's power. In the face of the violent raids and opposition from AFL leaders, the General Strike Committee voted to end the strike.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Way to go, Mark Grimaldi, my producer.
Back to the aggressive progressive, Mark Levine.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. Dr. Bollinger has another meeting. He's quite busy doing public health, but I was glad to have him for the time that we had him. The COVID crisis is it's so many things at once, right? I mean, people are dying. Americans are dying. So obviously that's a terrible thing. And it's also important to recognize the scope of it. I think sometimes, and maybe the fact that, well, it's all happening in hospitals where we can't be there while people are dying, we don't recognize the scope of what we're talking about. It's 135,000 Americans. I remember early in the crisis when I said this could kill 50,000 Americans. This could kill the number of Americans that died in Vietnam, and a whole bunch of Trumpists swarmed Facebook to tell me that I was wrong, that I was lying, that how dare I suggest such a thing. And now we're approaching 3 times that amount. I mean, I remember when we crossed the $3,000 person threshold, which of course is the number more than the number that died as of September 11th. I mean, you can't even do the math anymore. We're 45 times 9/11. September 11th was such a big deal, remember, that we went to 2 wars. And now we've lost 45 times that number. It's staggering. It's in every community. It's in every state. It's in virtually every county of the United States. And if you heard Dr. Bollinger, you know the danger is we ourselves. The danger is, and you don't want to say it, but selfish Americans. Selfish Americans who are putting their own physical comfort ahead of other people's lives. like Dr. Bollinger made a good point. He described it like drunk driving. Yeah, sure, we drank and we want to get home, but it's not worth killing someone because of it. And the thing about wearing a mask, as I pointed out, is that it protects the other person more than it protects yourself. So if you're wearing a mask and the other person isn't, you're in more danger than if they're wearing a mask and you're not. Seems really unfair. Diana writes on my Facebook page that some doctors are talking about the fact that cotton masks and bandanas don't work as well as other masks. That's true. The best mask is the N95 mask. That's the mask that Dr. Bollinger wears when he sees patients. That's the one that protects the wearer as much as the person on the other side of the mask. It's two-way. There used to be a shortage of these things called personal protective equipment, right? PPEs. Now there's not so much anymore. It depends on where you are. If you're in Florida, God help you, or Texas, or one of the states where it's sort of out of control, Georgia, then they may be harder to find. But here in Virginia, you can get them now. I have my own N95 mask. And those do protect you the best. But a bandana, a cloth mask, does serve its purpose. It is not the same as not having a mask at all. If you're infected and you're wearing a mask, those droplets, whether you sneeze or even just speak, get trapped in the mask. You are saving others' lives. And because the disease is asymptomatic for a while, perhaps permanent, there's some folks maybe who get COVID who never have any symptoms, we think. But certainly we know that in the first few days of your being infected, you don't show symptoms. You are saving people's lives. And so it's interesting that the mask debate really comes down to, I guess, how you feel about others. If you feel that you are a part of a community, if you feel that it is your responsibility to protect others, if you feel that we're all in this together and we're all one nation and we should all look out for one another and ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? If you feel that, well, for one thing, you're probably a Democrat, but also you're more likely to wear a mask. And the studies show that Democrats wear masks far more frequently than Republicans because Democrats have empathy for other people. We actually care whether our neighbors live and die. And so we are willing to take that step. Nobody likes a mask. They're hot, but they're not terrible. There's no pain involved. Think about giving yourself an insulin shot, right? The things you have to do to protect your health that are far more painful than wearing a mask. It's not that big a deal. But Republicans seem to believe in this individual notion. And I'm all about individual human liberty. But I've often said that your freedom to throw your hands around stops where my face begins. It's sort of an old saying, right? The problem with your not wearing a mask has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me. It's like smoking in public. I've always been fine with banning cigarette smoking in public. I get that the cigarette smoker wants to smoke, but it's not just about you. Yeah, you're killing yourself. And if you want to kill yourself, I might encourage you not to do it, but I probably wouldn't prohibit it. But when you start to kill me, when your secondhand smoke starts to cause me lung damage, sorry, you've got a problem. Your freedom ends where mine begins. And so if you go out without a mask, your freedom ends where mine begins. And I think one way to enforce mask wearing, sort of a traditional way, is that if you don't wear a mask and I get infected, I should sue you. Now, I may die, wrongful death. I can bankrupt you. All I have to do is prove that I was around you when you had COVID and you breathed in my direction, you didn't wear a mask. Oh, well, you're going bankrupt. It's a lot less harmful than killing me. I mean, is it that different, not wearing a mask, from throwing a punch? Is it, or even if you didn't intend it, right? Dancing crazily and throwing your arms around, drunk driving, cigarette smoking. If your conduct causes damage to my health, it's not about your freedom anymore. And then I look at people like, well, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp. Now, Brian Kemp is quite famous because Kemp is really the first governor to actively bring, well, he's not the first. I wish he were the first. Let's just say the most successful modern governor in bringing back Jim Crow laws. You remember Jim Crow laws, the laws that said that black people can't vote, they have to pay poll taxes or go through literacy tests or say how many jelly beans are in a jar before they're allowed to vote. Well, one of the things that Brian Kemp did, and he was the Secretary of State of Georgia, he was in charge of the Georgia voting rolls, is he was in a tough election with Stacey Abrams. And so he did his best to remove from the voting rolls as many blacks as he could. Oh, you're black, you can't vote. So he removed them. You know, if you missed a postcard in the mail and didn't say, hey, you exist, hundreds of thousands of people illegally removed from the voting rolls. You think this is something that's the time of, well, the 1960s or earlier, you'd be wrong. Brian Kemp said, bring Jim Crow back. He knew he couldn't win a fair election, so he removed as many blacks from the voting rolls as he could, and also those in liberal voting areas. That's really bad. But he's actually done something worse even now. Brian Kemp has issued an executive order to prohibit cities, towns, localities, counties in Georgia from protecting their own population. More than a dozen Atlanta cities and towns and counties, places like Atlanta, Savannah. Remember, when folks are packed in tightly in cities, it's more likely that the virus spreads. That's one of the reasons why New York City had a strong outbreak early on. Cities are the most dangerous spots. So these Georgia local officials are doing the responsible thing, and they're saying, hey, you must wear a mask when you go out into indoor places, just like we do here in Virginia, like they do in Maryland. You go out and you must wear a mask. Well, Kemp actually forbade localities from protecting their own population.
What? Freaking idiot.
Think about why that is. It's worse than idiocy. Think about it. Who lives in Atlanta? Who lives in closely tight populations? Who gets COVID at a greater percentage than other Americans? Well, if you're poor, if you're black, if you're Latin, if you got to work and do one of those essential jobs, like drive a bus or be an orderly at a hospital, one of those low-paying jobs that you need because you can't afford to have one of these white-collar jobs where you sit behind a desk and talk, folks like me, right? You've got to go out and you've got to work. You've got to be in the streets. You're a street cleaner. You're a postal worker. You can't hide indoors all day the way many of us are privileged to be able to do so. Those tend to be poorer people. They tend to be people of color. And yes, they are suffering at a much, much higher rate. Because let's face it, this has exacerbated existing inequalities in America. People who can't afford health care. We have some 35 million people removed from health care right now in the middle of a pandemic. Remember, Republicans are doing their best to kill the Affordable Care Act, which they call Obamacare, right in the middle of the time that most people need it. Well, the people that suffer the most in this pandemic are poorer people, people of color, exactly the same people in cities who aren't going to vote for Brian Kemp. Now, am I saying that Brian Kemp is intentionally allowing a virus to spread so that people die and won't otherwise vote for him? Yes, I am. Because I can't think of any other reason he'd do it. He has not given a reason. But given that he removed black people from the voting rolls, I feel like he's doing something even worse to Georgians now. Back after this.
We discovered that my daughter was using drugs. We were really at a loss. We'd been told by so many people to kick her out, to use tough love. You can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to substance.
We'll be back in 4 minutes to close on the air.
It's a slow process, and although it hasn't been perfect, she's not using drugs anymore, we're really hopeful. We're all in recovery from this disease.
There's hope and help at drugfree.org. A message from Partnership for Drug-Free Kids.
Loans are made by WebBank. Rates and terms vary based on credit history. Amazon is not a sponsor of this promotion. Other restrictions apply. See website for details.
I was making great progress on building my savings, but then I get hit with an unexpected car repair bill.
Keeping a close eye on my credit score allowed me to buy my first house, but an unexpected medical emergency set me back.
When the unexpected happened, Avant was there to help. If you need to borrow $2,000 to $35,000, try Avant. It's fast, simple, and transparent.
Everything is done online. There are no prepayment fees, and no collateral is required. And you can instantly check your rate with no impact to your credit score.
Politics, we might as well talk about the political result. For those of you who are new to this, we actually have a commercial playing on radio right now, and I decided not to subject you to that. So you getting a lot of spam calls? I know I am. Far more than I usually do. Back in 90 seconds. I saw really the same story repeated 3 times. 240,000, right? Right. Oh. Okay, all right. 240,000. 1/3. No, 1/3 of children tested are positive. Wow. That's great. That's crazy. Oh, I guess you also probably talk about the Oklahoma governor. Governor Stitt. I forgot his first name. Kevin Stitt. Mm, 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 mm. Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. So where do we go from here? The virus is clearly dangerous. Why is it that the president is even doing what he's doing, right? Why is it that the governor of Georgia wants more Georgians to be infected? The President of the United States moved the convention out of North Carolina and into Florida because North Carolina was insisting that the Republican delegates actually not spread the disease among themselves. Think about it. He was willing to kill his own supporters. What's the point? What's the political point? Well, the president seems to believe, like the ostrich with his head in the sand, trying to avoid that lion, that the more the American people don't know, the more they won't blame him for the virus. Sure, a bunch more will die. The latest studies show that it could be 250,000 Americans, 250,000 Americans dead by this virus. I remember when Trump said 100 to 240,000 would die, and I remember thinking that was extreme, that he was just trying to pick some really high number, knowing that we would never reach that. After all, in Europe, the numbers dying are in the tens of thousands, the lower tens of thousands, nowhere near 100,000. But now it looks like we could actually grimly beat that estimate. 1/3 of the children tested in Florida currently have COVID. 1/3. And states like Arkansas, South Carolina, states that used to insist that they would never join the mask orders, they're changing their mind. Maybe one of the clearest examples is the Oklahoma governor, Kevin Stitt. The Oklahoma governor, and Oklahoma is about as red state as they come, was insistent that Donald Trump was welcome to come to Tulsa, that all the people who said wear masks were being really silly. He was there. He was at the arena. He was with all the people, and he just came down with COVID. The first governor in the nation caught it due to Donald Trump. Think about it. Donald Trump's rally directly affected not only thousands of his supporters there, but the governor himself. Now, it probably won't affect the president electorally Oklahoma is such a red state, again, one of the reddest states in the country, that losing a few thousand lives of Trump supporters won't affect his overall winning the electoral count. Hey, another reason why you should want the popular vote? Then deaths matter, and not just in certain states. It's a grim notion. But other than politics, what can possibly explain Trump and Kemp? The White House press secretary was just asked about Donald Trump's push to reopen the schools. And, this is a direct quote, the press secretary said, quote, "The science should not stand in the way of this," unquote. That's right. She said science, protecting American lives, saving lives, preventing needless death, should not stand in the way of Donald Trump reopening the schools. What? What a hero. The only solace I can take from all of this, and there's really very little, is that Donald Trump is diving in the polls. Frankly, his approval rating of 36% strikes me still as crazy high. That a third of Americans still trust this guy. But what we're finding is that COVID has a way to force people to recognize the truth. I don't need to get their names out. They're already dead. But you see stories one by one of Republicans on Facebook. I don't want to wear a mask. It's an attack on my freedom. Liberal, blah, blah, blah. And then they get COVID and then they die. And some of them, to their credit, admit before they take their last breath that their railing against public health was a mistake. And Dr. Fauci, the great public health warrior who's been around since the days of HIV, he's been sidelined. Donald Trump actually ran an ad against Fauci as if he were the political opponent. Now, I get when Trump attacks Biden. In fact, I think it was yesterday that Trump said that you can't vote for Joe Biden. Joe Biden wants to abolish not just law enforcement and prisons, he wants to abolish suburbs and windows. Oh my God, I have windows in my house. Joe Biden's coming for me, and I live in the suburbs. I'm a suburbanite with windows. Who believes this? I don't think 36% of Americans believe this. What Trumpist is dumb enough to believe that Joe Biden wants to abolish suburbs and windows? We have an unhinged president. And what's fascinating is the Republicans who are going to go down with him. Right? They can jump off the sinking ship. There are many lifeboats left on the Trump Titanic. Senator Mitt Romney, who, need I remind you, was the Republican standard bearer in their last presidential election that Trump didn't run in. 2012, he ran against Obama. I had my issues with Romney at the time. I felt that he was looking out for rich people and not for poor people. But I didn't think he was an inveterate liar. I didn't think that he would sell our country out to the Russians. Mitt Romney has jumped off the ship. When Donald Trump basically did his quid pro quo with Roger Stone and said, hey, Roger Stone, don't let them know about all my crimes and I'll make sure that you don't go to jail. Mitt Romney said that was unprecedented corruption. Mitt Romney has talked openly about the fact that we need to wear masks, and some Republican governors have too. I remember the North Dakota governor saying, hey, this shouldn't be a political issue. But everything's politics in the Trump era. Even such simple things as wearing a mask. Even saying that a mask saves lives. Think about that. When did saving American lives become a bad thing? We're going to get past this moment. I hope and pray that Dr. Bollinger is right and we're going to get a vaccine early next year. But he said that was the most optimistic. Let's be clear what he said. He said that was the most optimistic, that it'll be the fastest ever if we get a vaccine in 12 to 18 months, the first 6 months of 2021. It may be years in the waiting. This is our new normal. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to focus and accept that. I think sometimes the folks that don't want to wear masks don't want to face the truth. They're the exact same people Donald Trump is hiding data from. If we don't test people, and we don't let people know what the results of those tests are, if we don't let the CDC have the results of those tests, sure, a bunch more Americans will die, but my supporters, the ones who purposely hide their eyes from the truth, will never figure it out. You know, the ones that think that Joe Biden wants to abolish suburbs and windows. But COVID has a way of getting around that. It infects everyone. And even if it infects blacks and poor people at a higher rate, it also infects Trumpists. You want to know where the disease is out of control? Take a look at your red states. Texas and Florida, the Carolinas. That's where it's on the rise. And it's on the rise not because the virus attacks Trumpists, but because the people who choose not to protect themselves tend to get it the worst. And unfortunately, in places like Atlanta, Georgia, liberal mayors want to protect their populations, but are not allowed to do so. This is a question of life or death. It shouldn't be about politics. But what it should be is a wake-up call to those Americans who still think anything good about Donald Trump. I get it. There are Republicans that really, really hate abortion, that really think that we need women's bodies to be under the control of the government and a whole bunch more poor people on the planet, and actually think that an embryo is a life that can't be that a woman shouldn't be able to end that life. I don't believe every egg and sperm is sacred, but that's a separate question. The question right now is, what about grandma? What about someone in their 50s? What about children? Those lives don't matter. I get it. You love the embryo, but do you hate the human? People who've lived and loved, who are dying alone? Folks need to get their priorities straight. And your priority is not being comfortable on your face. The priority cannot be a bunch of conservative judges. This is life or death. And Donald Trump and the Republicans who support him are a threat to American lives. We have to vote him out in November. This is Mark Levine signing off.